Hey Pokemon fans, Real Mama Eagle here, also known as Key, and today I'm here to rank all the Pokemon professors from Generation 1 to Generation 9. The opinions in this video are my own based on how I think each professor adds to the story. I will not be using any story elements from the Pokemon anime. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and talk to me in the comments section below, letting me know how you would rank the Pokemon professors. Now let's get started. Number 10, Professor Magnolia. Professor Magnolia is one of the two professors you see in Generation 8, and she's a sweet elderly woman. You and Hop meet her early on at her lab and house when she gives you a Dynamax band and she teaches you about Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing. After that, you don't really see her a ton in the story. You see her one time in Hammerlock, but she does pass the Professor reins on to Sonia because it may be presumed that she might be a little bit older to handle being a professor from that point on, so she doesn't really become an integral part of the story. You do see her in the post game where she does tell you to use either for good and not evil, so that does show she's a morally good person, but we don't see her enough in the story for her to constitute being a higher ranked professor, so that makes her worthy of number 10. Number 9, Professor Elm. Professor Elm is the professor in Generation 2, and he is a professor that is known to be a bit scatterbrained with his work and his studies, and that's why he appoints you, a kid, to help him with this Pokemon mission and complete the Pokedex. Now, he does do the usual things a professor does, gives you a Pokedex, gives you a Master Ball late in the game. He does talk to you, he does call you and check on you, so that's also pretty commendable. But what pretty much has him lower on my list is the fact that 1, he appoints a kid to do his work, and 2, he literally let another kid break into his lab and steal a Pokemon. But what rates him higher than Professor Magnolia is the fact that he does give you an SS Aqua ticket, which does allow you to go to Kanto, which is pretty cool in Generation 2 for the time, and also the fact that you do get a Togepi egg from him, and Togepi at the time was considered a very rare Pokemon, so that does give him the slight edge and make him worthy of number 9. Number 8. Professor Birch. Professor Birch is the Pokemon professor in Generation 3, and he's a pretty cool dude and the father of your rival. He doesn't really add a ton story-wise to the game like the two professors prior to him, but he does have that personality, relatable, being a workaholic professor that sometimes doesn't see his family. But one thing about him that's pretty cool is that he is an author. He's written multiple books on Pokemon, which is pretty neat. And if you beat the Gen 3 Remix, the Delta episode, Hall of Fame, and complete the Dex, he does give you a Sinnoh and a Unova Pokemon as gifts, which is pretty neat. He would be higher on this list if he didn't run from a Poochyena, which made no sense because you're a professor, you research his Pokemon every day, you have your own Pokemon, but you ran from one of the smaller Pokemon. I don't know what that's all about, but Professor Birch definitely worthy of top 8. Number 7. Professor Sycamore. Don't be fooled by the ranking. I actually very much enjoyed Professor Sycamore. I like the fact that he sent a bunch of kids out to you to give you your Pokedex and your first Pokemon, so you could kind of bond with kids because you're going on a journey, you don't know anyone, so he was ultimately thinking of you. Then you get to meet him at his really cool lab in Lumoy City with his great music, and he's one of the first Pokemon professors that you actually get to battle, which I thought was dope. Then he gives you a starter, even though it's a Gen 1 starter, but he still gives you a starter, and he does teach you about Mega Evolution, which is a very important part of the Gen 6 storyline. He also is very involved when it comes to Team Flare and their business. He's very disappointed when he finds out the effects of Team Flare, and he's very apologetic and empathetic to what you went through dealing with Team Flare. So Professor Sycamore is a guy that's well tuned into his region, always knows what's going on, and overall is a good character. Would be a little bit higher, but the other professors higher than him offer a bit more, but he's definitely worthy of top 7. Number 6. Professor Rowan. I actually liked Professor Rowan a lot in Generation 4, and it was a refreshing approach to previous gens because his lab in Sand Gym Town was very defining. It was the first time they didn't force a Pokemon lab in the first city, which was pretty cool. But I love the exchange at the lake where you totally took his briefcase, used one of his Pokemon to escape all the Starly, and I like the fact that instead of being a bitter old man about it, he actually lets you keep the Pokemon, told you to come to his lab, gives you a Pokedex, tells you to go on an adventure. He doesn't really give you a ton of items throughout the game, but he more so gives you lessons on what Team Galactic is doing, and always is mindful about where you are, and I was always worried about your safety, which I thought was pretty neat. I also love the human elements of him as well. He has a very sweet tooth in Platinum. He's in the Veilstone department store and he's mad that they're out of candy. I think it's so hilarious. But he is also responsible for the shaping of Cynthia. He gave Cynthia her Pokedex and her first Pokemon, which I thought was really, really cool. Rowan has a lot of depth to him and makes him very likable, very relatable, and worthy of top 6. Number 5, Professor Oak. Some might think this is a nostalgia pick, but honestly, Professor Oak does a lot and has more appearances than any other professor, which is pretty cool. And Gen 1, he's kind of just there giving you your Pokedex, you know, sending you on your journey, even checking his grandson, which I thought was fantastic. Keeping things even and keeping it fair, would definitely appreciate it. You know, gives you the National Dex, gives you the Master Ball, and all these different games. And I like the fact that when you see him in Gen 2, he even is kind of like bigger and elevated. Everybody knows who he is. He has so many friends. And I love the fact that he's actually a radio host in Johto. He takes the bullet train, which I thought was pretty cool. And I also like the fact that in Gen 4, you see him, he actually opens up the access to Pal Park. He activates the event where you can get Shaman, and then he activates like the legendary birds in Gen 4. So Professor Oak is higher than the previous professors because he's very influential. A lot of the professors probably take their inspiration from him, or they're all friends with him. And ultimately, he is a guy that is everywhere. So he is definitely worthy of top 5. Number 4, Sonia. Sonia is one of the professors in Generation 8, and I personally love the passing of the torch from Professor Magnolia to Sonia, from grandmother to granddaughter. I thought that was really awesome because it showed the bond they had and it showed Professor Magnolia's faith in Sonia ultimately. Sonia carries Professor Magnolia's work out very well, talking about Mega Evolution, but taking it a step further, being a great historian. She tries her best to find the truth behind the Sword and Shield legendary Pokemon mystery and how that affected Galar's past. She taught you the history that the rest of the game didn't teach you, which I thought was so amazing. I like the fact that she was also not a try-hard battler, and she was just more about her history and more about the journey and just relaxing. You kind of saw her just hanging out and chilling. I love that she had a childhood friendship with Leon. That was a nice little arc, a nice little wrinkle. And I also love the fact that she is in the DLC. She basically helps you with a legendary Pokemon mystery in Freezington. I can't believe they would name a town Freezington. But Sonia has a lot of great qualities and a lot of promise, which makes her worthy of top 4. Number 3, Professor Juniper. Professor Juniper is the Pokemon professor in Generation 5, and y'all have no idea how much my heartstrings were pulled at when we finally got a woman professor for the first time ever. That makes Professor Juniper so groundbreaking, so legendary, and you can tell that later professors were kind of inspired by her in a sense. Professor Juniper is very sure of herself, and she's very chill but also serious at the same time, has a great history of Pokemon and the areas in Unova, which I thought was great, which she taught to Bianca, who became her successor in a sense. I also love the fact that you have an encounter with her and her father in Black and White, and that kind of signifies the great relationship between father and daughter. So she's a very relatable professor, but just the fact that they were not afraid to go girl power as a professor for once, and her having a very decent arc, makes her very worthy of top 3. Number 2, Professor Kukuai. Am I saying that correctly? I hope so. Professor Kukuai is the professor in Generation 7 and one of my favorite professors of all time with the best arc ever. There's nothing that this man does not do. He's a world traveler. He wears a mask and has an alias as the Masked Royal, and he competes. He's married to a lovely woman who is also a professor, finally showing a healthy business working relationship between a professor and his wife, which is so awesome. He also is involved with the Team Skull nonsense as far as helping the player, and he's a very, very knowledgeable and cool guy. He also has one of the best looking labs ever. This guy has a bed that's in a great spot and has an aquarium in his house. It's so amazing. I love the fact that he's kind of like casual too. Totally walks around with his lab shirt open. Doesn't really care, but they are on an island. And he established a Pokemon League for the Alola region because they didn't have one and they needed one. So he built that up by himself, which was super cool. I also like the fact that in Pokemon Sun and Moon, he is the champion. You do battle him. It was the first time you ever had a big battle with a professor on that stage. So between the arc, the overall fit, just the overall alias, personality, this guy's busy doing so many things. I don't know how he has time to do it. And that makes him worthy of top 2. Number 1, Professor Seda and Turo. Now, this is not recency bias. I know you're probably thinking, Key, number 1 professor from Generation 9, but seriously, I was blown away by these professors. For starters, look at them both. They're probably 2 of the most good-looking people you'll ever see in a Pokemon game, which explains why their son Arvin is extremely good looking as well. But they are one of the most relatable groups ever as professors. For starters, they're both busy professors. They have a busy life, and then that shows why their son has serious abandonment issues, and a lot of people can probably relate to that in real life. But then they navigate you through the game. They check on you. They tell you how to get your legendary moving, how to get your legendary more abilities, so they're a great aid to you. But then it gets dark, and I applaud Game Freak for this because it was different and unique. It was the first time a professor ever in a Pokemon game made you emotional. I got so emotional. You go down to Area 0, you find out that the professor is a likeness because the original professor died. And it's a very heartwarming, sad, and haunting moment all at the same time because you have to basically go shut down the system that is creating those Paradox Pokemon and letting them loose. And then there's a heartfelt scene where you battle and defeat the professor, and then Arvin goes through a very traumatic moment. I have to hand it to Game Freak because I didn't think that they were capable of doing that like this, especially with newer Pokemon games. But because they never did this with a group of professors, made them a likeness, made them pass away, made it dark, and then on top of that, you had the abandonment issues with the son. they're taking this list. They are absolutely number one. I would love to know how you feel about my professor list, and I want to know in the comments section below how you would rank the Pokemon professors. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. I am also Real Mama Eagle on all streaming platforms, and I do live streams at twitch.tv/RealMamaEagle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.